Привет, I'm Chuck Olinik, a Ukrainian-American baptized with the name Yaroslav, and that's the name that I use in the historical reenactment group, the Society for Creative Anachronism, where I'm known as Yaroslav the Persistent, or Yari. So, what I wanted to cover in this video is something that eats away at me all the time. Before I stumbled into anthropology as a major in college, I was under the impression that I was going to be an astronomer. Hence the sky stuff on here. But it turned out I preferred stories about the planets and the stars rather than the math behind them. And so I started digging into the lore. I'm also going to throw in not just Slavic lore, but some Baltic tales as well, just to compare. Of course, folk astronomy is going to be heavily tied to agriculture and rituals, the movement of the sun, moon phases, and constellations were used to determine the timing of agricultural work. A solstice or an equinox becomes a big, important ritual. All right? And the winter solstice was a critical time for solar rituals with legends of solar heroes fighting against evil forces to release the sun. So watching the stars and the sun was not just about timekeeping and agriculture, there was also moral guidance. And the stars and the planets were not just for navigation, but provided omens as well, and a different sort of guidance. In the quick, overly simplified version, the world's viewed as a three-tiered structure. The world tree, with a heavenly plane for the gods, earthly plane for us, and the underworld for the spirits. Okay, that's a common enough idea. Just look at Norse mythology. Right? Since we're bringing up the world tree idea, the top of the world tree has a number of different functions. It's marked by the pole star, which has been called Pripil or Zirka Povidunka. It's often called the hitching post around which the celestial oxen, that's the Big Dipper, rotate, or it's the guiding star for travelers. The Poles call it Gwiazda Polarna, but used to call it the nail around which the sky turned. The people of Belarus called it the nail as well. Hvozd, driven into the sky around which the celestial cart or Big Dipper rotates. The Serbs also saw it as a nail around which the kolya or wagon revolves. The Lithuanians called Rezulo Ratu Asis, and the Latvians Zemels Vazgni, the axis of the wheels, or the world tree, is often identified as Ostras Cox, or the tree of dawn. It represents the axis mundi, the polar star, connecting the earth to the celestial realm. Okay, from pole star, it gets us to stars in general. Okay, there was a predominant belief across Slavic cultures that the number of stars in the sky corresponded to the number of people on earth, and that an angel or a deity of some sort lights a star when a child is born and extinguishes it upon their death, and that causes a shooting star or falling star. And maybe this reflected a person's life. Bright stars belong to the wealthy or the nobles, and dim stars represented the poor or maybe the elderly. Or the stars could be viewed as fair maidens carrying candles who dance in circle dances called horovods. Then again, the Lithuanians and Latvians held the idea that the sky is a farm. Traditional riddles describe the stars as curd thrust into a bowl or a flock of sheep. Let's take a look at the Milky Way. The Ukrainians called it the Chumak's Road, the most famous Ukrainian name for the galaxy, referring to Ukrainian salt traders who traveled by ox cart to the Crimea. The bright band of stars was seen as a road of spilled salt or dust that guided them home. I'd also heard it referred to as the River of Souls, the celestial bridge for departed loved ones. The Poles called it by another name, the Highway to Rome, or the Pilgrim's Road, seen as a celestial path for those traveling to holy sites. Unlike Ukrainians, the people of Belarus traditionally saw the galaxy as a path for migrating birds, geese or cranes, flying to a mythical warm land called Verai. The Bird's Road, which is a name used by the Lithuanians and the Latvians. South Slavic tradition called it Kumova Slama, Godfather's straw. According to legend, a man stole a basket of straw from his godfather, and as he fled, the straw spilled across the sky, creating a permanent reminder of his shameful act. Okay, so then there's one more that I have to tell you that's not quite the culture areas that I was mentioning, although they are Baltic. There's some Estonian folklore about the Milky Way, and it involves the sky god Ukko and the queen of the birds. Actually, more properly, it's about their daughter Lindu. Lindu rejected many suitors, like the sun and the moon, because they were too predictable for her. Instead, she fell in love with the Northern Lights. When the Northern Lights abandoned her, her tears and her flowing bridal veil created the Milky Way in the sky. And in the folklore of some regions, the stars are called children of the sun and the moon. Of the constellations and planets in the old days, not so many were distinguished in Slavic or Baltic lands as by the ancient Greeks. Instead of the 48 constellations, of antiquity, think about 30. Their popular names are largely associated with agriculture, tools, household items, or mythological ideas. I'm going to go through some of the main ones. First, Slavic stuff, so Ukrainian, Belarus, Polish, and the Balkans, and then we'll see what the Baltic peoples were calling them. First up is Ursa Major, or the Great Bear, or just the Big Dipper. While known internationally as Ursa Major, Ukrainians traditionally call it viz, basically the cart or the wagon. The Serbs call it kolya. The 4 stars of the bowl are the wheels, and the 3 stars of the handle are the oxen or horses pulling it. In some regions, it's also called Solomon's cart. In Belarus, it might be a wagon that Ilya, or Elijah, rides across the sky. And before he was Ilya, he was Perun, the god of thunder. The Poles have a similar name, and other descriptive names include a ladle or a dipper, or a kovsh, and then sometimes it's called los, a moose or an elk, or viad medzvitsa, a she-bear, which gets us back to Ursa Major, the big bear, right? And you might get the 7 sages out of this. Okay, 7 main stars. As to the Balts, it could be the Great Bear, it could be the Great Wagon. Sometimes it's the Great Crooked Wagon, or the bucket, or the ladle, or the Great Cup. And because there's that similarity of pantheons, the Lithuanian thunder god gets some representation here. So the dipper might be called Perkūno Ratai, the wheels of Perkūnas, their thunder god, similar to Perun. Ursa Minor, okay, Little Dipper, that could be the little back wheels or the small crooked wagon. Okay, so I may have found a Baltic name for the Little Dipper or Ursa Minor. I couldn't find a Slavic one. But there's a legend about a doomsday beast chained on the North Pole that I promise I'm going to get to it at the proper point. Let's continue with the circumpolar stars. Cassiopeia's distinctive W shape has been called by Ukrainians Borona, that's the harrow, an agricultural tool used to break up soil, and in Belarus and Poland there were similar names. But in Belarus there's another name for it, burning hair, and in Poland it could be called Tron, the throne. Okay, now we're getting to Orion and his belt. The stars of Orion's belt were seen in Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, and the Balkans largely as the Mowers. 3 mowers standing in a row as if working in a field, and their position once helped farmers determine the time for haymaking or the end of the harvest. In Belarus and Poland, the 3 stars were also called hrabli, the rake, while the Serbs called shtapovi, the staffs, as the entire constellation. The staffs used by shepherds as a seasonal marker for agricultural activities. Okay, so we're going to move from Orion's belt and Orion to not Taurus, but the Pleiades, the most obvious star cluster visible to the naked eye. If you're going with the Greek mythology, these are the 7 sisters. And since they're in Taurus, constellation guides make reference to they form the shoulder of the bull. There's a bunch of names here. Stojare, derived from stojar, a pole for haystacks, reflecting the cluster's appearance of many small embers, or its role in timing the harvest. Volosajare, which is the name my parents used. It was an ancient name that was linked probably to the Slavic god Veles or Volos, protector of cattle, or could have been glowing hair. Kvochka means brood hen. Okay, so there's another name for the cluster where the stars are seen as a hen surrounded by her tiny chicks. You also might hear Soil the sieve, or in Belarus Sita, the sieve, through which God sifts grain, or angels sift righteous souls, and there's similar names in Latvian and Lithuanian. In Poland, the Pleiades are known as the Babe, the old women, or the Gossips, and apparently that name is pretty unique amongst cultures. Okay. The most prominent star cluster in Serbian lore, known as Vlachike, the mythology is the stars represented 7 brothers, or sometimes 6 brothers and a sister, and the brothers were supposed to have rescued their sister from a dragon, and they all died in their sleep and were elevated to the sky. The constellation Gemini, the twins of classical mythology, become Lel and Polel, twin sons of the goddess Lada. The only other constellation I could find was what we call Cygnus the Swan, or the Northern Cross. And the people of Belarus referred to Cygnus as St. Peter's Cross, and the cross-like shape is identified sometimes as Petrova Palka, Peter's Stick, or Tsaru Crest, the Tsar's Cross. The moon was highly venerated, often called grandfather or uncle in Serbian and Bulgarian lore. It was believed to influence health with full moons. Sometimes there was a fear that they would cause sleepwalking in children, or even blindness. Stains on the moon were often interpreted as a girl with buckets, or smiths forging stars, or a couple in love. The sun, moon, and stars were central characters in Baltic myths, and they are often depicted in a big celestial wedding drama. So I'm going to talk about the Baltic, sun, moon, and Venus, and then jump back to see how the Slavs think of the sun and his attendants. In the Baltic celestial family, planets are often identified as daughters or sons of the sun, Saule, and the moon, Manu. Venus, the morning star, that was amongst the Lithuanians, that was Aushirine, or The Latvians would call her Oseklis. And like a lot of other cultures, Venus as the evening star gets a different name. The only other names that I found for the planets were Indraja for Jupiter, Ziezdre for Mars, and Mercury was Vaivora, and Saturn was Selija, and that was shepherded by the moon. Okay, here's the main Baltic myth. Menu, the moon, is the father or husband of the sun, Saule. In many myths, he is punished by Perkunas, the thunder god, because of his infidelity with Osirin. Now, as far as the moon's influence, the moon's phases are critical for agricultural and life events, and the waxing moon was linked to youth and wealth. The waning moon was associated with aging and decline. Now we switch to the Slavic side. Dajbog is the god of the sun. He's got 3 daughters. Well, okay, really there's 5. There's the aurora of the dawn, the dusk, and midnight. Collectively, they're known as Dajbog's maidens, as well as Zvezda Denica or Danica, the morning star, and Vechernaya Zvezda, the evening star. Together, they're the Zvezdi. By the way, the only other planet names I ever found were the red horse for Mars and the black horse for Mercury, and I'm trying to remember exactly where that source was. Zoria Utranyaya, the aurora of the dawn. She's a goddess that is married to Perun in some versions, and she's the very personification of the dawn. As the dutiful daughter of Dajbog, she opens the gates of her father's palace so he can ride forth at the start of his daily journey across the sky. And he ages as the day progresses. In the evening, as Zoria Vechernaya closes the gates and he and the horses re-enter the palace, dusk takes place. The Zoria of midnight heals her father, and the Zvezdi, the morning and evening stars, they have the task of grooming their father's horses. Okay, there's one last bit of lore that I've been promising to get to, so here it is. Together, the 3 sisters, Dajbog's maidens, are known as the protectors of the universe. They're watching a doomsday beast, which is chained to the pole star to keep him from breaking free. If he was able to escape, the world would end. I just happen to like that story, and I just happen to think it's really cool. Okay, so a journey through Slavic and Baltic skies. Until the next time, do pobacenia.